promote me to a doctor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, but I don't belong down there. You know, as you suggested, we've had a little trouble getting along up here on the dais and with the White House as well. So in the next 4 minutes, I just want to see if we can get you guys to get along or to agree. Following up on Senator Klobuchar's things about talking with Dr. Hassett's spending cap and now Dr. Zandy's budget deficit or ratio to GDP. And Dr. Hassett, you mentioned, just did in response to Dr. Zandy's proposal, that hasn't worked very well. Let me ask you both, any of these sorts of caps. I come from California, a state which has a balanced budget constitutional amendment, hasn't had a balanced budget in the last 14 years, in spite of a balanced budget constitutional amendment. I'm also a CPA, so I observed all of the different things that are done in order to create a balanced budget when it's, in some cases, $20, $30 billion, which is 20-30% out of balance. How do you deal with that in either of these scenarios, with any kind of cap, be it debt or deficit, or be it spending?
Either of us? Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, either, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Either. I think that first, you know, Dr. Zandy and I have disagreed about a lot of stuff, but if he's here saying this current circumstance is causing economic harm, and then I'm saying it's probably twice as big as he says, and I think his team is more in favor of the economic harm point right now, or the Democratic team. You're not necessarily your team, but that's, we have to accept that we need to get out of that world. I think that, you know, maybe one reason we're in that world is that people have recognized, and I've recently written about this, that it seems like the minority party very often feels like the debt limit is one of the only times they have a chance to influence legislation, and it's been pretty common for that to happen. We need to get out of that world. And so then, you know, if we adopt a rule, we adopt the rule because it's the cost or the price that we pay to get out of that world. And then when we do that, we should all acknowledge that, well, if we don't obey the rule, then we're going to have to go back into that world that is so damaging. And it ought to be that everybody should agree that we don't want to do that. And I think that absent that kind of almost economic patriotism, then of course the rule won't work. But I think the rules need to be adopted so that we get out of this world where, you know, I mean, Steve Davis's estimates were really astonishing, that GDP is probably about 3.2% lower, and there are 2.3 million fewer jobs today because we've been playing these brinksmanship games.
Okay, so are you?
And so we have to adopt a rule so that we can, those 2.3 million people would have a job.
And are you okay then, or not okay with the rules that Dr. Zandy suggested relative to debt?
You know, I would rather have a spending rule, but I think that if you know, one side's really adamant it's a deficit rule, then you could accomplish the same thing. You could accomplish the same thing, you know, because it's very hard to increase taxes as a share of GDP. I think spending rule is more targeted, is more precise, it's a better rule, but I would take virtually any rule over the circumstance that we have today.
Dr. Zandy?
Yeah, let me just say a few things quickly. One is that, to your point, no rule solves our problems, right? At the end of the day, it takes political will to come together. So a rule is helpful, but it's not a solution. The second point is the current rule we have, de facto, is the debt limit, and that's a counterproductive rule, given what we're seeing happening on a regular basis. It's not, as Chairman Bernanke has said, the way to run a railroad. So we have to get rid of that, or at least neuter that as the way we're operating, because it's doing significant damage to us. And it seems to me that if we don't change that, it will continue to do so. And either party will do it to each other.
Let me just, in the last 30 seconds, do you agree with that point, Dr. Hassett? Yeah. You do? Okay. Back to you, Dr.
And then I think this next question, well, what do we replace it with? How do we make this better? That's a very good debate, and Kevin and I and others should fully engage on this and exactly how we would do that, because we each have our concerns about how to do it. But in my view, the structural deficit to potential GDP makes it fundamentally is important in this way. And this may be where we disagree a little bit. In my view, our long-term fiscal issues are both a spending problem and a revenue problem. It's a revenue problem because of the demographic reason I just gave you, right? Just the simple aging of the population. You don't want to say that we don't need more revenue to pay for the services to people just because they went over the age of 65 and require more government services, just by definition. So in my view, it is a spending issue. I'm on board with that. The cost of medical care is the key spending issue, but it is also a revenue issue because of the demographics. And we need a budget rule that is sensitive to both of those.
Thank you. Time is